Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into the frozen villages of medieval Europe, where peasants did not rely on central heating or grocery stores but on wood fires and meager stores of grain. Forget the festive feasts and glowing hearths you see in romantic tales. The real struggle was staying alive through months of bone-chilling cold and dwindling food. So tonight we ask, why wouldn't you survive a medieval winter? What did it feel like to sleep under ragged furs and wake to ice-coated walls? Every region faced its own brutal freeze, so let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. It's always fascinating to see whose land we tread through this long, dark season. Now dim the lights, pull your blanket close, and let's shiver into the deep freeze together. The first pale light of dawn breaks through the mist as villagers stir from frozen beds. In every cottage, wood smoke lingers in the air from last night's fire. Now the task begins anew. Families slip on thick woolen tunics and wrap coarse wool around their heads. The chill cuts through every layer, but no one stays indoors. At the edge of the forest, men and women gather their axes and adzes. They nod to one another in quiet greeting, then step into the gathering gloom between the trees. The forest stands silent under a blanket of snow. Frost clings to every branch and droplet of morning dew glints on fallen pine needles. Every breath forms a cloud in the cold air. No words are needed to convey urgency. Each person knows that without sufficient wood to burn, cottages will freeze and food will spoil. A slender youth huddles next to a fallen trunk. He lifts his axe with stiff arms, planting its blade squarely into the thick wood. Each strike sends a shard of splintered wood flying. The trunk groans as deep rings of heartwood yield beneath repeated blows. He pauses only to wipe chipped wood from his brow, then readies his axe once more. The rhythm is steady. Lift, strike, withdraw, repeat. A woman next to him uses a smaller hand axe to cleave branches into manageable logs. She shifts her weight carefully on sodden earth, then swings to split each branch at its weakest point. Each log glides apart under the force of her careful aim. Nearby, a pair of men work together to fell a young oak. They choose one whose trunk leans sharply toward the ground. The thicker end prepares to fall into a bed of untouched snow. With an eye towards safety, they chip away at the base until a V-shape forms. The final blow of the axe rings out, and the tree collapses with a crash that echoes between other silent trunks. They hurry forward, guiding the falling wood so it does not strike a smaller sapling. Once on the ground, they work together to saw the log into lengths that will fit snugly into hearths. Once logs are cut into manageable pieces, they retrieve coarse hemp ropes to bind them into bundles. From earlier seasons, they learn to split logs only when the wood is dry. Dry wood burns more fully and produces less smoke. The split pieces expose heartwood that holds reliable heat. Each villager tests the wood by tapping its surface with a small stone. If the wood rings with a sharp, hollow tone, it is deemed dry enough to burn. If the sound dulls or the wood flakes away under the tap, they set it aside to season for another season. Bundles of split wood are placed on small sleds carved from sturdy oak. The runners are fashioned into smooth sinews of wood that will glide over the packed snow. Family members gather around and lift the sled from its moorings. The heaviest logs weigh as much as an adult alone can lift. Together, they guide the sled across narrow trails. The sound of wooden runners scraping against hardened snow echoes through the trees. Every step requires mindful balance, as hidden stones and roots lurk below the snow's surface. When a stone catches under a runner, they tilt the sled and shift their weight to free the load. Their cheeks redden from the cold and effort, breath forming small clouds in the air. Soon the sled is caught again by a sudden dip in the trail. They pause to level the runner, then distribute their strength and heave forward in unison. Back at each family's cottage, logs are stacked in a pyramid beside the hearth. The stack stands no taller than chest height to avoid collapse. Men ensure that the stacked wood is stable and protected from the wind. From the top of the pile, A small covering of thick canvas shields the wood from drifting snow. This simple barrier prevents the top layer from being buried each time the wind whips winter across the roofs. Meanwhile, inside the cottage, women dust ashes from the previous night and prepare fresh tinder. They gather strips of bark from nearby dead birch trees and bundle dried grasses that last summer's harvest left behind. These lighter materials kindle quickly and coax a flame when kindling must ignite a cold hearth. An elder moves about inside each cottage, filling small clay jars with animal fat. Rendered fat forms a paste when mixed with fine sawdust. This mixture will smolder slowly when placed under coals. It keeps embers alive through the night so they can be rekindled in the morning without struggling to start a new fire. The jars are placed near the hearth, within reach but away from curious children. The elder teaches each child to recognize the heat of embers and the sound of smoke rising. They remind them that a single spark must be fed carefully to avoid the entire house filling with smoke, or worse, abandoning the ember and facing a frozen dawn. At the communal well, neighbors gather to exchange news while dipping pails into icy water. They speak quietly of the Queen's taxes and the price of grain. A veteran woodworker shows a younger man how to sharpen an axe using water and a stone. He presses the stone to each blade until the iron edge gleams. He reminds the youth that a dull tool requires twice as many strokes and twice as much strength. The youth nods and feels shame in his earlier hurried slashes that failed to fall through thick wood. He applies more care now, angling the blade carefully and moving slowly to achieve a sharper edge. Once each family's hearth boasts a stack of split wood and enough animal fat in jars, they venture out again at midday for more work. The wind picks up, sending gusts across open fields and stirring patches of drifted snow. They load sleds with small branches collected along the boundary. Children carry bundles of kindling to the hearth. Each small stick will help start the fire the next morning and fill hearths with gentle warmth while larger logs roast game or stew. By late afternoon, each cottage stands ready for winter's night. The woodpile glows amber in the waning light. In each hearth, coals burn steadily as the first split log crackles into flame. Families gather around the fire, sharing a thin broth of root vegetables. They dip slices of coarse bread into the simmering liquid. The meal nourishes them, but also serves as a final warming ritual before darkness falls fully. The children hug quilts as they listen to stories of past winters. Elders remind them of the lessons learned, how wood must be split and dried, how embers must be preserved, and how every ember savor matters when frost bites hardest. When night gathers like a cloak over the frozen village, every hearth glows with a sacred warmth. The work of gathering firewood and fuel remains unfinished, but each family has built a shield of embers and logs that stands between them and winter's fury. Eyes grow heavy as family members settle near the fire. They watch coals glow and sparks drift upward like tiny stars. A sense of calm settles in, for now. They know that tomorrow at dawn they will rise again. Without pause, they will don wool and leather, make their way once more down forest trails, and bring home another haul of wood. For in a medieval winter, each ember saved and each log felled writes the story of survival. The hours slip away until the first star appears in the sky. An eldest child rises to feed the hearth one last time. He gathers small logs from the pile outside and places them gently on the coals, careful to keep the flame low. He tucks a handful of animal fat against the coals beneath the new log, ensuring glimmering embers lie ready to catch the spark. The rest of the family drifts toward their beds, faces lit by the last flicker of flames. Each step they take away from the hearth reminds them that even in the darkest freeze, a spark can endure through the longest night. When the hearth's last glow fades to embers that cling to ash, the night deepens and all is still. In the hush, a single thought lingers in every heart. Gather wood before dawn, for with any delay the snow will rise, hiding life's warmth beneath its cold white veil. Each breath they take carries the memory of every log split, every ember saved, and each lesson learned. Through toil and travail, they rise to meet winter's challenge, knowing that only by working together can they guard against the icy embrace that seeks to claim hearth and heart alike. As daylight warms the sky into a pale blue, villagers meet again at the woodpile beside the main path. The pile stands tall, logs arranged in rough tiers ready for hauling. Each log bears marks where the villagers cut and split it the previous day. Now the task is to bring that fuel home. It falls to teams of 2 or 3 to attach ropes to the logs and guide them onto wooden sleds. The sleds are simple yet sturdy, crafted from heavy oak boards fitted with smooth wood runners. These runners will slide over packed snow under the weight of each log. A young man named Aldrich steadies one sled, while 2 neighbors gather logs and position them on the runners. The logs lie side by side, balanced so no wedge will tip them when they begin to slide. As Aldrich steps behind the sled, he braces his feet wide and plants his hands firmly on the rope. His companions pull forward, testing the sled's movement. The wood groans as it meets friction from the uneven snow. Aldrich calls out to encourage his friends. In unison, they heave the sled forward, each step stirring a soft crackle from the warming snow beneath. Their breath puffs in the morning air. Their boots sink slightly with each step. When the sled catches speed, they guide it carefully along the path, avoiding hidden ice patches that could send it skidding into a snowbank. At the bend in the road, another team pauses at a small ridge. They must descend slowly. Too rapid a descent, and the sled could run out of control. They shift their grip on the rope, slowing their pace. The sled glides smoothly down the slope. Children playing nearby pause in their games to watch the procession of logs snake across the field. They shout greetings and offer cheers when the sled makes it safely to flatter ground. Once past the field, the team heads toward a narrow lane lined with stone walls. Here the trail narrows, and the woodpile's height gives way to smaller stacks in front of cottages. Each family has carved a space near the hearth where they will store their own supply. As the sled reaches these stacks, neighbors step in to help. They unstrap the rope and lift logs off one by one, stacking them near the door in a neat pile. The topmost log goes first. They place it against the door frame and check that it is secure. The bottom log rests on 2 support stones to let air pass beneath when drying. In one cottage, the youngest daughter watches intently as her older brother lifts a heavy log from the sled. She carries smaller kindling sticks to the hearth. When he places the heavy log in its spot, she offers him a nod of approval. He returns her smile and pats her shoulder. The sense of teamwork gives warmth to the chilly air. Across the lane, another cottage holds a small group who works more slowly. Their sled bears half as many logs because they split some smaller portions for surveyors or elders who may need a lighter load. One elder sits on a wooden stool by the hearth and inspects each log before it goes inside. She taps her short staff on the wood, listening for that ringing hollow sound that means the wood is dry. She frowns at a single log whose surface remains damp. She sets it aside for next season, as a training piece for firewood, only after thorough seasoning. She will place it near the roof, where a trickle of smoke through a small vent will speed its drying. For now, she only allows the driest logs to become part of the chief supply. A faint breeze stirs the smoke rising from the hearth. The heat pushes outward, forming a circle of warmth that keeps frost from creeping inward. Each ember in the hearth glows with intention. The logs will burn steadily through the longest hours before dawn. The oldest among them carries a clay jar filled with rendered animal fat and sprinkles small pieces among the coals. The fat melts and glazes the coals, preserving embers overnight. He reminds the younger hands that a single glowing ember can spark fresh flame even when a gale howls. By rationing these embers carefully, they protect themselves from cold that stiffens bones and numbs fingertips. Children gather around the hearth to warm their faces. The glow from the coals reveals thin cheeks and bright eyes. One child places a small stick into the fire. It sputters and cracks, then settles into a steady flame. The child watches with fascination. The elder whispers a lesson. Each spark is a promise. Guard it well. The child nods solemnly, understanding that this fire will keep them safe until the morning. Outside, teams continue to haul logs. One team leads a sled toward the smithy where the blacksmith's forge must remain lit. The forge consumes more fuel than a cottage hearth because it must reach white heat to shape iron. The smith's apprentice carries buckets of coal and smaller split logs to feed the blast once the bellows begin. He helps push the sled beneath the forge's vent and breaks each larger log into lengths that will burn efficiently. He sweeps away ash from yesterday's work and stacks new logs in a neat row. The flame brightens at his approach. Not far from the smithy, a group of elders convenes at the meeting space near the chapel. They share advice on rationing logs through the season. Each contributes knowledge passed down from their own childhood winters. One elder notes that a stack of 10 logs can keep a hearth burning through 3 nights if embers are managed with care. His companion counters that smoked fish or dried grains require a small flame and a suspended cauldron. They tally how many embers they need each day, estimating that hoarders must keep at least a dozen glowing coals to rekindle the hearth when winds howl. When a final sled arrives at a family stack, the laborers stack each log with care. They build a lean-to frame in front of the door made of thinner poles and cover it with wedges of bark. This creates a barrier against drifting snow but still allows logs to breathe. They tie a length of rope around the piled logs so no shift in wind dislodges them. At each cottage, they drape a coarse cloth across one side of the stack to keep snow from piling above the logs. These simple measures ensure that when the next day arrives, each log remains dry and ready to burn. Inside one cottage, the mother sits before the hearth gathering ash. She scoops a handful of grey granules from the ring of stones and sprinks it into small grooves in the floor where she will place leek and carrot roots. The ashes create a layer of insulation that keeps the roots cool but prevents complete freezing. This measure ensures they have vegetables come spring thaw. She stirs the stew as the bright flames lick beneath the iron cauldron. The aroma of roasted grains and smoked meat carries warmth to every corner of the dark room. Outside, the final rays of dusk brush the frozen fields pink. Sleds stand empty now, leaning against wood piles that whisper of another day's labor. The scent of moss and oak drifts through the evening air. Villagers gather by each hearth and share a meal of porridge and dried fruit. They dip slices of rye bread into the thick broth, grateful for the warmth that fills them. They watch the dancing flames and listen to the crackling wood. They know that tomorrow the process begins anew. They remind each other that winter demands constant attention. A neglected hearth yields to cold in moments. Logs left uncollected today may lie buried tomorrow. Yet the bonds formed through shared labor bring comfort. When each family settles toward its own bed, swaddled in furs and wool, the hearthkeeper performs one final rite. He places one final piece of wood across the embers and trays a handful of animal fat to keep the coals alive. When the fire sputters to embers, he whispers a vow and draws a small cross in the ash. He hopes that through faith and diligence, these ember hearts will burn until the morning light. In the silent hours before dawn, the hearthkeeper rises once more. He returns to the hearth with a single clay pot filled with hot water. He pours it gently over any remaining ashes to create steam that softens the hearthstones for fresh wood. He smiles at the embers that cling faintly to the coals, knowing they will serve as kindling for the next day's fire. As he steps outside, he breathes deeply, feeling crisp air fill his lungs. He looks at each cottage's stack of logs, each hearth still glowing faintly. He feels satisfaction in knowing that families inside will awaken to warmth. Outside, snowdrifts form new shapes across the fields, but those hearths stand ready. At the first thread of dawn the next day finds the woodcutters returning to the forest's edge. They trudge through the drifting snow, axes resting on shoulders. They share jokes to lighten the weight of labor, smiles hidden beneath scarves and caps. The forest welcomes them as it always does, silent yet inexorable. They know that through every swing of the axe, every haul of the sled, and every ember saved, they preserve life through winter's unrelenting test. Each day's effort weaves together a tapestry of survival, shaped by trust and shared determination. And though season after season may press with cold and shadow, the flame at each hearth remains an unspoken promise that life endures in the deepest freeze. Before dawn breaks, the villagers gather at the smoky hovel where meat hangs from rafters in neat rows. A layer of coals glows beneath a low brick chamber filled with fragrant smoke. Hams, sausages, and strips of beef sway gently as the warm air circulates. The master of smoke tends the fire, adding handfuls of dried oak bark and sage to maintain a steady curl of fragrant tendrils. Each handful lands with a soft hiss as embers shift and release new wisps of smoke. The meat surrenders its moisture to the rising heat and aromatic mist, slowly curing until its flesh dries firm and takes on a rich brown hue. This process preserves every ounce, ensuring that even when snow piles high and hunting fails, families will still break crusted bread with thin slices of smoky meat. Nearby, a group selects freshly harvested grain from sacks stored at the edge of the communal barn. They sift through the kernels, removing any stray weed seeds or tiny stones that fell during threshing. A woman steps forward and pours a handful of barley onto a sturdy wooden table. She presses each grain between her thumb and forefinger, feeling for imperfections. Once the grain is clean, she passes it to a youth who gently spreads it across clean linen sheets laid out beneath the open rafters. The rising sun heats the barn's interior, and the breeze seeps through slatted walls, carrying away stray chaff and moisture. The youth leans close to inspect the grain's hue. A golden sheen means it has dried fully and will resist spoilage. He stirs the grains slowly to ensure they all bask in the sun's warmth. Beyond the barn, other villagers gather in a low stone building with an earthen floor. This building serves as a root cellar, cool and dark during all seasons. They carry baskets of carrots, turnips, parsnips, and beets from the field, its soil clinging to the rough skins. Each villager brushes soil free, revealing the crisp flesh beneath. The roots remain covered in a fine layer of dirt to protect them from bruising. They stack the vegetables in neat layers upon beds of straw that line the cellar floor. Straw cushions each layer and keeps the produce from pressing too tightly, allowing air to circulate and preventing mold from developing. Once a layer completes, a fresh handful of straw covers the row before the next begins. A man approaches, carrying wicker baskets heavy with peas and beans picked green days before the first frost. He brings them to a narrow wooden rack near the open door of the barn. From a pair of simple scissors, he severs the stems, dropping the pods into the basket. He then places a fresh bundle of peas and beans on a length of twine stretched between two beams. Each pod rests on the twine in a single row. As daylight filters through narrow gaps, the flesh inside the pods breathes dry air and loses moisture. Soon the pods crack when handled, revealing brittle peas and beans ripe for storage. He nods in satisfaction and unties the dried bundle to transfer each brittle pod to a covered sack. Returning to the smoky hovel, a woman rakes glowing coals slightly to one side, making a shallow bed of ash on the hearth floor. She lifts a clay pot filled with milk from a neighboring cottage and sets it above a small flame. The pot shudders as heat rises. She stirs gently to prevent the milk from scalding and keeps a careful eye on its color. When the milk thickens, she ladles warmed curds into flat baskets lined with cloth. The curds drain slowly, leaving behind whey that she collects in a separate bucket to feed pigs or churn into soap later. The cheese formed by these curds will sit on planks near the fire until cool air sets its form. As the weeks pass, the cheese hardens and develops a rind that protects it through winter months. A boy lifts a clay jar from a shelf in the cellar. He inspects its clay lips for cracks and then stirs a mixture of crushed juniper berries and salt. The berries lend a sharp tang to any meat brined in the solution. He pierces each hunk of meat with a clean blade and nests the pieces into the jar, ensuring every inch touches the curing liquid. When the jar fills, he seals it with coarse cloth and a waxy seal that keeps out insects and moisture. In a few days, the meat will develop a subtle pink hue and firm texture, ready for winter meals that offer warmth and sustenance. Outside, villagers plant pumpkins and gourds atop mounds of soil sealed in clay around the rim. A layer of straw covers each fruit, and a final coat of dry leaves keeps frost from touching the rinds. In some areas, apple orchards supply a harvest for cider and dried slices. Families gather baskets of apples, slicing each fruit into slender rings and threading them onto ropes for hanging near the hearth. As rings drip sweet juice into a shallow dish, they begin to curl. Soon, the drying fragrance fills each home, reminding children of autumn's sun and the warmth of family gatherings. A few brave souls venture to a nearby bog to harvest wild cranberries and lingonberries. They kneel on moss and press their fingers gently through low branches. When berries cling to each frosty twig, they pop into relying on quivering leaves. Collected berries become an early treat, added to breakfast porridge, or stewed with honey for a dessert that brightens long winter's nights. Meanwhile, the village elder instructs youths in the art of storing grain in wooden bins. The bins remain sealed by thick lids that block rodents from nesting in the stored grain. Each grain bin stands in the coolest corner of the barn, protected from direct sunlight and damp. The elder pounds a small piece of wood against one bin's side. The dull thud tells him that the bin remains full and packed, the grain settled and ready for months ahead. He reminds each listener that a single sparrow can devastate an entire bin if holes appear in the lid or if grain weevils find their way inside. As twilight descends, torches flicker at each cottage door. Villagers return from the woods and fields, carrying creels of root vegetables and bundles of dried beans. They work together to carry supplies to the large communal storehouse that stands on a rise above the village. This storehouse features thick stone walls that hold a cold but steady temperature. They open the heavy oak door and place logs across a simple latch that holds the door firmly closed. Inside, they lay down a layer of straw before unloading barrels of salted pork that hung over the hearth all summer. The salt, combined with gentle warmth from stored embers, cured each slab of meat to a firm texture, sealing in juices that will nourish them through bitter nights. On the floor below, rows of wooden bins hold barrels of grain and flasks of honey. They lock each bin's lid in place and mark the date in chalk upon the barrel's rim. The first barrels to be emptied will be those most recently harvested, ensuring a steady rotation of fresh grain that resists spoilage. The honey jars are placed upon wooden shelves near the far wall. Later in winter, they imagine stirring a spoonful of honey into steaming broth for children who feel the chill deep in their bones. Inside the council hall, the wealthier households convene to arrange parcels of surplus grain or meat that they intend to share with those who have less. They place each gift into a cloth sack and add a prayer for the rising sun to return warmth to those hearths filled with need. Within minutes, younger volunteers carry these parcels to cottages that lie at the far edges of the settlement. Each gift means that a father can bake a loaf of coarse rye bread, or that a mother can add a slice of smoked venison to the family stew. By the time night descends fully, every household has stoked its hearth and placed dried rations upon a nearby shelf. Beneath the floorboards, sacks of grain rest undisturbed. Beneath the smokehouse's rafters, cured hams swing gently above coals that glow faintly, ready to kindle a flame when needed. Beneath the root cellar's earthen floor, layers of straw and dirt enclose row upon row of potatoes, turnips, and beets. each one poised to be turned into nourishing broth before the frost yields to thawing spring. When the moon rises, the village grows still. One by one, families gather around their hearths to share a simple meal of smoked pork and dried beans, accompanied by thin slabs of hard cheese made earlier in the month. Children listen to stories of past winters when food ran low and elders bore frozen fingers to gather wild berries for tea. They speak of how unity and resourcefulness guided families through the darkness, storing every morsel with care. As the final ember glows in each hearth, the last log consumes itself in sparks. Each family member stands then gives thanks for the harvest, for the smoke that preserves meat, for the sun-dried grain that thickens porridge, and for the root vegetables that slumber just below the earth's grasp. In the silence, they reflect on lessons learned, how to harness fire to cure meat, how to coax moisture from grains under open skies, and how to bury life's sustenance beneath cool soil for months ahead. When sleep finally takes them, they rise once more toward dawn, ready to renew their work of preserving food for months. The forest waits to yield fresh fuel. The earth stands firm, holding root and tuber alike beneath frost. The smokehouse remains warm with memory of yesterday's embers. The barn's rafters embrace drying bundles of grain under slanted beams. Through each laborious step, villagers remind themselves that preservation is not merely a task, but a promise to endure, a testament to careful craft that bridges summer's bounty to winter's breadth. By midday, the sun climbs higher, warming the thatched roofs, yet doing little to soften the icy air. The villagers regroup at the edge of the fields, each carrying a sheaf of stalks from the previous harvest. They have harvested oats, barley, and wheat before frost claimed the stalks. Now they must remove every kernel before the autumn rains can rot what remains. A young woman stands at the center of the field with a slender wooden flail. She lifts it high and brings it down in an arc, striking a bundle of grain so that kernels spill onto a coarse cloth spread before her. The kernels glint in the sunlight, golden and plump. She moves quickly from one sheaf to the next, each swing of the flail sending a small cloud of chaff into the breeze. Nearby, children hold baskets to catch falling kernels. They laugh as they duck to avoid stray strikes, grateful for the warmth that this work brings. The husks fly away on the wind, carried toward hedgerows and distant hills. Each child learns to hold the basket just so, tilting it as the kernels tumble down. A boy offers kernels to his sister, who slips a handful into her pocket to nibble later. The taste of new grain remains sweet, even after days of sun exposure. Once the threshing is complete, the adults sort the kernels by tossing handfuls into the air. The wind separates lighter chaff and stray debris from the heavier, full grains. They watch as clean kernels fall in neat patterns, while husks drift across the field. When a gust fails to cleanse a batch completely, they gather the remaining chaff and winnow it by hand in shallow baskets. Each shift of the basket shakes more unwanted bits free until only the pure grain remains. The last step in this process is the drying of grain. A pair carts the cleaned kernels into a large barn with open, slatted walls. Inside, raised platforms of clean straw hold the grain apart from the cold earthen floor. A villager's foot guards against spilling a single kernel as they use a simple wooden rake to spread the grain evenly. The barn's walls allow a gentle wind to pass through, carrying moisture away. Each day they return to stir the grain, ensuring no hidden pockets of dampness invite mold. In 2 days, the grain dries fully and will not spoil even if stored for many months. At the same time, a smith's apprentice brings freshly caught fish to be smoked. The master smoker readies small wooden racks near the hearth. He pours handfuls of crushed juniper and rosemary from a clay jar onto hot coals. The aromatic smoke rises in blue spirals. He places fish fillets on the racks, ensuring each piece has room to breathe. Overhead, a thin leather strip seals the top of the smokehouse, allowing only a faint trickle of smoke to escape from a small vent. As the coals crackle, The fish absorb the smoky warmth and begin to shrivel, preserving the flesh against rot. Within a few hours, each fillet will turn pale gold, its flesh firm to the touch yet still supple enough to taste fresh when soaked in warm broth. In a shadowed corner of the barn, roots await their turn in the cellar. The cellar stands partially below ground, a cool refuge lined with stones and packed earth. A hole in the wall allows a hint of cold air, yet keeps out the worst of the winter chill. Families bring in carrots and turnips, now rid of most dirt. They place a thin layer of straw on the floor and lay roots side by side, ensuring each one avoids bruising. Over the rows of roots, they place more straw and cover the final layer with a thick cloth. This insulation keeps the roots from freezing solid, yet holds enough chill to prevent early sprouting. Once the grain and fish are secure, the villagers turn to preserving herbs and fruits. A woman carries herbs on long wooden trays into a small loft above the smokehouse. She spreads sage, mint, and thyme in rows over linen sheets. Each sprig catches the smoky air below, absorbing aroma and drying slowly. Within days, the herbs crumble easily between fingers, releasing fragrance that will flavor winter stews and breads. She then arranges baskets of apples and slices each fruit by hand. She threads each slice onto lengths of braided hemp twine and hangs them near the barn's rafters. The cool breeze from open slats dries the fruit rings until they curl and sparkle. Each ring becomes a treat to chew during long winter evenings. At dusk, the smith's apprentice closes the smokehouse's door and seals the vent with a small plug of clay. The smoking chamber glows faintly as the final embers burn low. He visits at dawn to stoke the coals before returning to repair a cracked horseshoe on the new mare. In the morning, he offers a handful of smoked fish to the farmhand who brought him the catch. The farmhand wraps the fish in a strip of cloth and places it in a clay pot that will live in the corner of the hearth until supper. Meanwhile, the village council convenes at the hall for a final count of supplies. A ledger bears marks next to each family name, tallying grain measured in small sacks and fish counted by weight. The council members note any shortfalls and assign tasks to individuals who pledged extra stores. They discuss the need to reserve some grain for seed come spring. That grain must remain viable to grow next season's crop. Each family agrees to set aside a portion, measured just so. The rest will feed families and livestock through frost and storm. After the meeting, elders walk through the settlement carrying small baskets of dried beans. They knock on each door and share a handful of beans with each family that offered fewer supplies. They remind everyone that unity will carry them through the long months when finding fresh food will prove impossible. When night arrives, village lights glow softly against the snow. Families gather at each hearth to share simple meals of broths made from dried fish and legumes. Lozenges of smoked meat season the stew, lending warmth and bold flavor. Hard cheeses from last season's milk dot each wooden bowl. They dip small chunks of stale bread into the steaming liquid, savoring every morsel. Each child eats slowly, mindful of the meager supply that must stretch until spring. An elder sits near the hearth and speaks of how once, before modern mills, grain would often spoil in cold, damp buildings. They recall how careful drying and safe storage changed fate for many families. Without that knowledge, entire communities would have perished. They remind the youngest generation that tending to each stage, threshing, winnowing, drying, storing, demands patience and respect for the land's gifts. As embers fade to ash, the last coals die, yet every family sleeps, knowing that tomorrow the grain, meat, and roots will remain safe. When winter widens its icy reach, they will draw from these stores to feed bellies and warm hearts. Through their labors in smoke and sun, they have built a bulwark against hunger, each day of preservation. Whether splitting kernels, curing meat, or layering straw, becomes a thread in the tapestry that sustains life through winter's long dark. Before dawn, the first task is to gather mud and straw for insulating the cottage walls. Villagers rise and walk across frosty ground to the riverbank. There they dig clay from the banks where the river slows into a bend. Each spadeful of clay is placed into a wheelbarrow. The clay is heavy and cold to the touch. From a corner of the barn, a group of women and children fetch bundles of golden straw. They carry the straw in wide baskets, careful not to let any stray pieces scatter into the wind. When they return to the cottage, they dump the clay beside the door and arrange the straw in neat piles. A single family stands before the wall of their wattle and daub cottage. The framework consists of intertwined poles and thin branches, creating a lattice that juts between sturdy upright posts, yet the woven pattern reveals gaps where chilly wind can slip inside. Today, the family plans to pack fresh mixture into every empty cell. They fetch a large wooden trough and dump several heavy shovelfuls of clay into its hollow. Next, they add handfuls of straw, mixing thoroughly by treading on the pile with hard leather boots. The clay and straw combine into a thick paste. The mixture cracks when dry, but when moist remains pliable enough to press into deep gaps. The family begins at one corner of the cottage. A father scoops a generous lump of paste and presses it into the lattice. His arms strain as he shoves it into every crevice, pushing until only a smooth surface remains. A mother follows, using a flat wooden board to spread the mixture evenly and smooth the surface. She wipes stray bits onto her apron, careful not to leave cracks. Children kneel at their feet, handing fresh bits of clay and straw paste to their parents without speaking. The cottage walls absorb the paste, sealing the framework from the air. Each press of the board seals another breath of warmth inside the home. As they work, a neighbor arrives with a leather bucket of water. The bucket is heavy, rivets glinting in the pale sun. She pours a trickle of water onto the new daub. The mixture softens and settles deeply into every corner of the lattice. She then splashes her hands and gently brushes the final surface, ensuring no tool marks remain to crack in frost. The water drips cold onto her wrists, but she holds a sturdy expression, knowing that thorough wetting prevents the daub from drying too quickly and crumbling. Once the surface feels firm to the touch yet damp, the family steps back to admire their work. The wall looks solid, its smooth earthen coat uniform in tone. Next, they turn to mending thatch on the roof. The thatch consists of bundles of long straw tied together at one end and laid in overlapping layers. Over the past seasons, wind and rain loosened many bundles. Now patches of underlying woodlath show through, and cold wind whistles into the attic. A father ties a sturdy rope across the front yard to hold a ladder securely. He climbs carefully onto the roof, sandals scraping across the wet thatch. Each bundle of straw he removes is brittle toward its end. He sets it aside, then lifts a fresh bundle to align it with older straw. The bundled ends tuck under the ridge that caps the roof. He lowers the eaves until the straw nearly brushes against the ground. Each layer overlaps the row below by several inches. When properly aligned, the straw drips rain away from the walls. He secures each bundle by weaving thin hazel rods around them and nailing slender wooden pegs into the wood lath. Below, his spouse and children hand up new bundles of straw. They pass each bundle through a window into his waiting arms. One child holds a lantern, so the workman can see more clearly between bundles. Another child gathers stray straw that falls onto the ground and tucks it into a basket. When the father finishes a section of roof, he returns to the ladder to move sideways along the slope. Each shift moves him another few feet until he covers the entire leaky patch. At last, he calls down that the work is done. The family watches as he descends, careful not to let the ladder slip in mud. Inside the cottage, a mother collects small pebbles and chunks of wool felt to use in sealing cracks around windows and doors. The window frames consist of thick oak boards with small panes of oiled cloth instead of glass. Gaps between the boards and cloth let in frosty drafts. She wraps bulky scraps of wool and pushes them gently into the gaps, pressing them until they fill every visible hole. Next, she lays a strip of cloth over each seam and ties it securely at each corner. The cloth smothers the drafts, keeping out wind that once howled through the cottage. A father checks the door's latch and hinges. Through several frosty nights, ice has warped the wood and rusted the metal. He uses a small brush to remove stubborn flecks of rust, then applies a thin coat of animal fat to each hinge. This lubrication allows the door to close more snugly. He then takes a carved wooden wedge and places it beneath the door's threshold, raising the door ever so slightly to prevent its edge from catching on icy ground. In a final step, he dips a cloth into melted tallow and smears it along the door's wooden lip. The tallow dries to a thin sheen that repels water and prevents frost from forming inside the frame. Meanwhile, by the hearth, the children finish clearing soot from the chimney's flue, allowing smoke from the nightly fire to escape more quickly. They use a length of green sapling bent around to form a hook. By sliding the hook through the chimney's opening, they dislodge crusted soot that gathered throughout autumn. They drop the soot into a metal pan beneath and shake each stone and flake away. Once the interior of the flue looks clear, they replace a small piece of wood over the hearth's opening that directs smoke upward. They light a small fire with leftover embers to ensure smoke drifts smoothly instead of settling in the room. With walls sealed, roof patched, doors secured, and chimney cleared, the cottage stands ready to face the deep winter cold. Each layer of mud and straw in the walls will hold warmth inside. The fresh thatch on the roof deflects snow and rain, keeping no drop from seeping into the living loft. The sealed seams around windows and doorways keep wind from howling through. The newly cleared chimney will let fire breathe without choking the inhabitants. Each small correction measurably reduces drafts and warms the interior by degrees. As afternoon opens to evening, a thin layer of snow begins to fall over the thatch and fields. The village takes on a hush, broken only by the scraping of shovel blades where paths have frozen. Families light their hearth fires, placing slowly burning logs in each hearth center. The bright glow illuminates faces as they gather near the flame. The mother stirs a kettle of broth toward the hearth's edge, while the father inspects each wall, gently tapping the surface of the new daub to test its firmness. When his knuckles encounter no hollow echoes, he knows the wall will hold. Outside, bundled villagers call greetings to one another, faces nearly hidden beneath thick woolen hoods. They glimpse each cottage's glowing windows and the faint flicker of candlelight inside. Through that same window, a child props a small wooden stool near the hearth to give a reserved measure of warmth to a sleeping infant. The flame crackles and sparks drift upward toward the smoke ejection hole in the roof. Soon the snow will cover every track, and wind will press against the walls with stubborn force. But the work is done. The cottage stands as a fortress of warmth in a land of ice. That night, families sleep in fur-lined beds, secure in the knowledge that their cottage stands insulated. Each breath they take is warmer than the world outside. The fresh daub in the walls will hold heat for days. The thatch roof will shed snow without leaking. The door, sealed and lubricated, will not creak open under a winter gale. Even the chimney will vent smoke, without letting chilly gusts inside. When they rise before the next dawn, the cold will still nip at door frames. Yet the tasks of the previous day will reveal their worth. At each cottage, the hearth fire will burn longer and brighter. Families will share steamy bowls of porridge without haste. They will dress in layers yet remain warm enough to work outdoors if needed. Tomorrow they will tend flocks or sift grain or tend livestock, but inside, each cottage will stand as a solid refuge, thanks to the wattle and daub craft that turns sticks and clay into a shield against winter's bite. As dusk settles, the sky fades to a pale silver, and the temperature drops with a sharper bite. Inside each cottage, preparations continue to tighten every gap where wind could find purchase. In the low light, a woman kneels before a small window opening, her fingers working carefully to fit a panel of oiled cloth. This cloth transforms the window into a barrier, letting in light yet warding off icy drafts. She uses wooden pegs carved from hazel branches to secure the cloth to the frame. Each peg presses the cloth flat against the wood, preventing any breeze from creeping in along the edges. When the last peg is in place, she draws a satisfied breath and steps back to examine her work. The window glows faintly from the hearth, its seams sealed against the cold. Nearby, her husband crouches to examine the door threshold. The door itself closes tightly, but a sliver of cold leaks beneath. He retrieves a long piece of braided sheep fleece and tucks it into the gap. The fleece compresses against the stone floor, stopping wind from seeping inside. Next, he fetches a small bowl of rendered animal fat. Dipping a corner of a rag into the fat, he applies it along the base of the door. The fat sets to a slick sheen that repels moisture and prevents frost from forming at the threshold. With one final press, the door clicks shut against the treated wood. The cottage interior suddenly feels warmer. Across the hearth, a teenager stands on a low stool and measures the height of a gap between the wattle and daub walls and the edge of the floor. He calls for his younger sister to hand him a small handful of moss. He learned this technique from his grandfather the previous winter. Moss, gathered from deep within the woods, remains dry even after rains. With fingers shifting brush aside, he stuffs moss into the space, pressing firmly to fill every cavity. The moss will trap warm air inside and resist cold air from outside. He looks to his sister, who smiles and nods as she offers the next tuft of moss. In minutes, they close the gap completely, ensuring no draft will slip upward along the wall. Outside, a small group of villagers gather near another cottage. One of them carries a wagon wheel rim bound with layers of thick felt. He props it against the eaves, driving a wooden peg into the wall to anchor it. This felt-lined wheel rim becomes a makeshift insulating collar for the chimney. By lowering it over the trunk of the chimney, they reduce heat loss and prevent cold air from rushing down the flue when the fire dies. A second villager holds a lantern high, illuminating flared stones at the chimney's base as the first villager secures the wheel rim in place. When dawn comes, the chimney will retain heat for longer, making it easier to revive a household fire with minimal fuel. Meanwhile, in another corner of the settlement, children gather scraps of burlap and burlap sacks left over from last season's grain deliveries. They tie these scraps into rough strips and climb onto low rooftops where loose thatch bundles need reinforcement. One child gently lifts a bundle of old straw and places a fresh layer of wild grasses on top. The burlap strips wrap around each bundle, holding the new layer tight against the old. Another child presses each burlap loop into place, ensuring no gap remains where wind can penetrate. When complete, each patch appears uniform, the burlap blending with the earthy texture of the roof. The patched thatch repels falling snow and channelizes rain toward the eaves, keeping the interior dry. Inside a two-room cottage, another family works to fortify a wall where the daub has cracked. An elder takes a wooden trowel to remove loose bits of dry clay from the fracture. Small pieces crumble to the floor as she works. Once the crack is clean, she dips her trowel into a fresh batch of daub mixture prepared earlier in the day. She presses the daub into the crack, pushing firmly until no crevice remains. Her partner stands by with a plank to smooth the new surface. With careful strokes, he levels the daub, blending it seamlessly with the existing wall. In the flickering light of a lantern, the fresh clay glaze appears smooth and unbroken. Nearby, a young girl assembles straw to fill gaps around the roof beams inside the loft. She weaves fine pieces of straw between the loft timbers and the underside of the thatch roof. Her nimble fingers massage each piece into place, preventing heat from escaping through the narrow cavity. A small chip of moonlight glints through a tiny hole above her head. She tucks one final tuft of straw into that space, and the moonlight fades as though content to remain outside. With the loft well insulated, the heat from below will rise and warm the sleeping area for the children and elders who will take refuge there. In the main chamber of a larger cottage, a blacksmith's family directs the placement of a wooden shutter over a wall opening once used for ventilation. They fold rough linen cloth over the shutter's frame and secure it with strips of leather. This shutter will swing closed against the interior wall later in the night. By day, it remains open to welcome sunlight and fresh air. By night, it forms a seal that locks warm air inside. When someone closes it from within, the cloth drapes closely along the edges, preventing cold drafts from slipping through. A lad fetches a small wooden peg to hold the shutter closed, making sure it sets flush against the wall. Meanwhile, the blacksmith stokes the forge for one final glow. He uses a long poker to pull burning coals together, ensuring a steady flame that will keep even his own cottage warm for hours after he descends. He then shifts to sealing cracks near his workshop door. A mixture of charcoal dust and clay forms a paste that he smears along the doorframe. The dark paste dries to a seal that repels wind and can be reapplied if it wears. When night approaches, he will stoke the coals once more, keeping a low ember glow until dawn so that his forge can leap back to full heat with minimal effort. On the other side of the settlement, a craftsman finishes weaving a reed mat for one doorway. He lays thin reeds side by side, binding them together with fine leather strips. This mat will hang across the doorway of a storeroom where salt and dried herbs rest. Salt will draw moisture out of the air, so the craftsman knows that a tight mat must keep humidity low. When the mat swings against a wooden frame each time someone passes, the airtight seal prevents precious salt from caking. The craftsman tucks one final reed under a leather loop and tests the mat's fit. It drapes smoothly, swaying gently in the breeze from the open window. By nightfall, each cottage stands fortified. The clay and straw daub in the walls remains smooth under lantern light. The straw bundles in the thatch roof secure under tight burlap wraps. Felt and moss line every crack around windows and doors. The chimney's felt collar will capture warmth, and the hearth's hidden embers will rekindle the morning fire. Reed mats guard storerooms, and door thresholds are sealed with fleece and tallow. As the final ember flickers across each hearth, villagers gather by faint candlelight to share simple meals. They sit close to the hearth where mushrooms and dry root vegetables stew in a cauldron of water. Thin slices of smoked meat top the stew, lending flavor and warmth. They dip turned slices of barley bread into each bowl, grateful for the fortification that will sustain them before dawn. Children watch the flames, their blankets tucked high against their chests. They listen to stories of how ancestors once braved harsher winters without the comforts of daub or moss. The elders remind the young that every layer of cut wood, every coil of straw in the walls, and every mat across a doorway stands between them and winter's fury. At last, the families retreat to small beds near the hearth, draped in furs and wrapped in linen sheets. The shelter feels complete. Outside, wind rattles the shutters on other cottages. Snowflakes drift across thatched roofs, piling in small ridges that will vanish by morning's dawn. Inside, the hearth's embers radiate soft heat until only glowing coals remain. As the coals dim, each ember spot lies under a careful pile of ash to survive until dawn, when a fresh log will ignite it anew. When sleep finally claims them, they rest secure in the knowledge that their labor defended them. The wattle and daub walls hold heat inside the cottage, while the thatch roof keeps sleet and snow at bay. Every crack sealed with moss, felt, or paste remains closed against the chill. Each narrow window bears the last protection of oiled cloth. The chimney vents smoke without letting precious warmth escape. The night deepens, But within each home, a family sleeps in comfort no longer governed by the cold. When the first hint of dawn stirs in the east, an elder rises to stoke the hearth just enough to warm a pot of water. The ember beneath the hearth floor, or a small coal within the hearthbed, resumes its spark. A fresh log finds its place beside glowing embers and ushers in a hearth flame that leans gently into the cottage. Soon each hearth will crackle and glow, warming every corner and driving away the night's chill. The cycle of cold and toil will begin again as villagers gather supplies once more, but for now, the shelter they have built with mud and straw, the sealing of every crack, and the repair of thatch leaves them strong against winter's reach. Each breath they draw is warmer than the world outside, and each heart rests in the promise that their homes will hold fast through the long hours until spring. In the quiet hush between the final ember and the rising sun, they remember that their ancestors taught them well, that simple clay, straw, and living wood provide a bulwark against winter's teeth. Through careful work and shared knowledge, they have transformed humble cottage into a refuge from frost. Tomorrow, they will renew the effort, gathering more clay, trimming thatch, patching more cracks. But for this moment they sleep, secure in the care woven into every wall and strung across every rooftop. Before dawn, the sheepherds lead their flocks from the pens to pasture, each sheep's fleece thick with winter's wool. A villager stands ready, with shears fashioned from iron springs curved into blades that tighten when squeezed. With careful motion, the shearer grips a sheep's woolly neck and begins along the back, parting fleece from skin in long, sweeping motions. The sheep bleats softly as tufts of wool drift to the ground in clean curls. Each fleece comes away in a single piece when sheared properly. The shearer carries the freshly shorn wool to a wooden bench where children kneel to pluck away bits of straw and grass tangled in the fibers. They work quickly, their fingers deftly teasing out debris until only pure wool remains. A weaver stands beside a large spinning wheel at the edge of the forest where daylight filters through bare branches. She gathers handfuls of wool from the bench and twists the fibers into a thick strand using the wheel's slow turn of a heavy wooden wheel. Each turn of her foot on the treadle sends the wheel spinning and draws out the wool to create a thread. She winds the new yarn onto a bobbin, the paper-thin spool steadily growing until the bobbin stands thick with woolen thread. When full, she moves to a warp frame where she arranges multiple threads lengthwise beneath a loom's crossbar. She pulls a shuttle back and forth across the warp threads, weaving a blanket of fabric that grows wider with each pass. The rhythmic clatter of the loom echoes through the clearing as bright yarns of grey and brown form a panel destined to become a tunic or cloak. Nearby, two young men sit beside a log fire, scraping cleaned hides with a curved stone blade. They learned from their father how to tan animal hides so that leather becomes soft yet durable. Using salt harvested from nearby salt flats, they rub each hide to draw out moisture and prevent rot. After a day's rest, they rinse the salted hides in a stream and lay them flat on rough boards. As they work the stone blade across each hide, they remove residual flesh and fat until the surface feels smooth. They soak the hide in a vat of oak, bark, and water, leaving the mix to ferment for several days. The tannin from the bark seeps into the hide, preserving it against decay and transforming it into supple leather that resists water and wears well through cold months. A woman supervises the children who braid lengths of hide into long thongs. These thongs will later form the drawstrings for woolen hoods or secure boots to ankles. Each child braids 3 strands of hide together, pulling tight to create a sturdy lace. They measure each braid carefully, cutting it only when long enough to loop through leather eyelets in a boot. A boy presses his thumb into the soft leather to test its give, ensuring no stiff patches remain. When satisfied, he hands the hide pieces to his older sister, who dyes them using nettle sap boiled with iron ore. The reeds of iron give the dyes a dark grey hue that will stand up to mud and rain. At midday, A bustling market forms at the edge of the village square. Traders from neighboring hamlets carry wicker baskets brimming with rabbit pelts, fox skins, and the occasional bear hide. A vendor lifts each pelt to show its thick fur and smooth underside, calling out in a loud voice for customers to inspect. His stall features hides hung from a rafter so that the full pattern stands out in the sun. One pelt gleams in shades of russet and tawny, its fur dense and glossy. A prospective buyer gently rubs the fur between calloused fingers to test its softness. When the vendor offers a price in silver pennies, the buyer counters with a pouch of dried herbs. They negotiate until both nod and exchange goods. The rabbit pelts will become soft lining for gloves, while the fox skins will line the collars of noblemen's cloaks, offering both warmth and style. A linen merchant in a nearby stall folds and spreads pieces of coarse cloth made from hemp and flax. He gestures at the widths and lengths, explaining how the cloth can be layered beneath wool garments to trap heat. A peasant woman examines a bolt of heavy linen and buys 2 L lengths to form a shift for her daughter. Under that shift, she will wear a woolen tunic and a fur-trimmed mantle. The linen will wick sweat from her skin during labor, while the wool will block wind. Later, when frost bites her cheeks, she will don a hood of rabbit fur that she purchases from another merchant. This hood will cover her head and ears, leaving only her face exposed to the biting air. Nearby, a tanner offers thick hides of deer that he scraped clean and soaked in tannin. He holds up each hide to let potential buyers see how supple and crack-free the leather appears. A bootmaker inspects the hide's texture by running a palm over it. He checks for uniform thickness and tests a fold to ensure the leather bends without cracking. Satisfied, he tucks a hide under his arm and promises to craft it into a pair of sturdy winter boots. These boots will feature a double layer of leather and woolen lining, ensuring that cold, wet winters nor muddy roads can chill feet. A shepherd approaches the tanner with a bundle of sheepskins, still covered in wool. The tanner examines each in turn, rubbing his hand over the fleece. He plucks away small twigs and bits of grass that clung through shearing. Once cleaned, the tanner points to the thickness of the fleece and hands a few coins to the shepherd. These sheepskins will become felted underlays to cushion wooden floors in cottages, keeping pounds above cold stones. Each sheepskin cut becomes a rug for the hearth, offering warmth underfoot and a soft surface for infants to crawl upon. In the market centre, a merchant from a distant valley sets up pelts of sable and marten. These furs shine with richer gloss than local pelts and command a premium price. Wealthy villagers and minor nobility arrive to inspect the luxury pelts. They run gloved fingers through each fur, delighted by its softness and density. One nobleman instructs his servant to bring a heavy cloak whose collar needs lining. He selects a sable pelt with deep chocolate-colored fur and signals the merchant. In exchange, he produces a small bar of silver stamped with the king's mark. The merchant weighs the bar carefully on a pair of brass scales and nods agreement. As the nobleman's escort departs with the pelt, nearby villagers watch with admiration and envy. At another stall, a hunter displays wolf pelts taken last winter. Each pelt's length and fur density testify to the beast's size. He mentions that wolf fur does not insulate as well as bear, yet many seek it for boots and mittens that must withstand sleet and deep snow. A woodcutter inspects the pelts, fingering the underfur between his gloved fingers. He chooses 3 sizes, one for his children's mittens, one for the hood of his wife's cloak, and one for a pair of boots he will make for himself. He pays in coins earned from selling firewood in the town's square. As evening approaches, the sun dips low and long shadows stretch across the market. The last buyers make their purchases and drift toward their homes. A village elder stands near his stall of coarse wool cloaks and shakes hands with a few customers. He thanks them for fair trade as he packs remaining cloaks onto a cart. Each cloak features several layers of dense wool lined with fleece. They reach down past the knees, ensuring coverage for the chest and legs. When a buyer threads a cloak over his shoulders, the thick wool covers him from wind chill. He steps toward the fire brazier set up in the square's center, letting the heat warm the wool before he departs. A tanner returns to his workshop hauling bark and salt for his next batch of hides. He spots a few villagers unloading wool at the communal weaving hall. There, the spinner unites wools of different textures into one thread. The tanner nods in approval as the spinner tests the yarn's strength. When he finishes, the tanner speaks of making mittens from the mixed wool thread. Each mitten will take 2 days of careful knitting by hand, ensuring dense stitches that hold heat. In another workshop, a shoemaker sits cross-legged before his low bench with a hammer, awl, and strips of leather. He cuts thick soles from cured hide, then layers animal fur beneath the leather to form a warm lining. He stitches seams with a strong waxed thread to prevent water from leaking inside his work. When the boot's upper takes shape, he pounds small iron nails into the midsole, tying the leather layers together. The finished boot stands sturdy and tall enough to stop snow from spilling into its interior. He dips the edges of each boot into a vat of tallow, sealing the leather and preventing water from soaking through. With each pair of boots he makes, he thinks of the family who will step into them each dawn, trusting their feet to remain warm and dry. As night falls, villagers return home carrying cloaks, mittens, and furs. Each family member wears multiple layers: linen shifts under woolen breeches, a wool tunic topped by a thick cloak. A fur-lined hood rests on a woman's head as she closes her cottage door against drifting snow. Her spouse drapes a wide woolen scarf around his neck before lighting the hearth. As flames leap to life, he spreads furs across a bench near the fire. Each fur glows golden in the hearthlight, reminding him of the warmth they will provide as he sleeps. The children gather in a circle, each wearing thick woolen caps and mittens knitted from mixed wool and rabbit fur. They lean close to the fire to warm their cheeks before heading to bed. Each child's clothing stands testament to hours of labor: fleeces sheared, yarn spun, cloth woven, and leather stitched into boots and mittens. The warmth they feel comes from countless skilled hands across the village. When they drift into sleep, their dreams hold no fear of biting cold, for their bodies remain wrapped securely in the protective layers. Outside, the wind blows through ancient trees bare of leaves. Yet inside each hearthlit cottage, families draw close, sharing bowls of steaming porridge spiced with cinnamon and sweetened with honey. They speak in hushed tones of the next day's tasks: tending flocks, splitting wood, and repairing wattle and daub walls. Each task relies upon garments that keep them from shivering through frost. They thank their ancestors for discovering how layers of wool and furs can guard against winter's chill. When a final ember dims, the hearthkeeper stirs the coals and blows gently until a quiet flame emerges. He places a small pile of spare wool beneath the hearth's edge to keep embers alive through the night. Each spark will give life to morning's fire. The cottage glows with warmth under its thick walls and insulated thatch roof. Each layer of cloth, each tanned hide, and each traded pelt stands as a testament that survival in winter demands not only skill, but cooperation. Tomorrow the market will open once more, and trades will continue. Yet tonight each family sleeps safe in the knowledge that they have gathered all that is necessary to keep their bodies warm through months to come. In the pre-dawn hush, the shepherd rises to check his flocks at the edge of the wood. The sheep's fleeces glisten with ice that will thaw as morning light touches each woolly coat. The shepherd wears a tunic of heavy wool lined with sheepskin, ensuring his own body remains warm while he walks through biting air. He pulls a felted cap down over his ears and steps onto frozen earth undisputed by snow. As he makes his rounds, he feels grateful for every layer of clothing that allows him to tend his flock. Each coat and cloak that hangs by the hearth once began as a fleece just sheared at dawn. Each step he takes across cold ground honors that connection between earth, animal, and craft. By the time the sun climbs higher, each cottage stands ready, woolen garments drying near the hearth, fur pelts draped across benches, and bundles of leather boots lined beneath tables. Each family has traded and crafted what they need. Through layering wool and skins, tanning hides for boots, and bartering pelts at the market, they have built a shield against the winter's breath. When cold winds howl across fields and forests, they stand firm in garments born of careful skill and bound by community. In this cycle of labor, each thread woven and each hide treated becomes a lifeline. As the sun rises, they know they are clothed not only for warmth but for the enduring simplicity of survival. Snow blankets the forest floor in a thick white coat that masks broken twigs and hidden patches of ice. At first light, a hunter steps from his cottage, clad in layered woolen tunics that fit loosely yet trap heat. His boots crunch against frosty ground as he moves toward the edge of the wood. The forest stands silent, save for the soft drip of melting icicles falling from bare branches. Each breath forms a small cloud in the cold air. He raises a simple wooden spear tipped with flint and adjusts a strip of leather across his back to carry a small quiver of arrows. Today he will seek deer tracks, fish through frozen streams, and set traps for rabbits beneath the snow. The hunter bends to examine faint lines pressed into the snow. A whitetail has passed by at dawn. He sees triangular indentations in crisp tracks that lead deeper into the pines. He follows the trail, careful to test each patch of snow before stepping. A hidden crust of ice can crack with a sudden snap that echoes through the forest. He slows, creeping forward on the balls of his feet. He peers side to side, searching for movement among tree trunks. The deer's tracks lead toward a thicket of spruce. Here the branches droop heavy with ice, forming a natural shelter where deer bed down during bitter nights. He remembers a lesson from childhood. Deer avoid open spaces at midday, but in early morning they return to graze on bark and dried grasses. He inches closer, kneeling behind a fallen log to stay out of sight. Minutes pass as he holds his breath. The forest remains still. Then a faint rustle reaches his ear as a deer steps into a patch of sunlight. Its fur blends with the dappled light as it nibbles tender bark from a fallen branch. The hunter stands slowly, drawing his bow. His arrow on the string hums quietly as he takes careful aim at the deer's heart. Without hesitation, he releases. The arrow flies true, striking the deer with a soft thud. The animal stumbles and then collapses onto the snow. The hunter approaches cautiously, thankful for the supple hide and tender meat that this kill will provide. He kneels by the deer and offers a quiet word of thanks. He works quickly to break breath into steam and then begins to skin the animal. Oak bark tongs stir coals in a small hearth he brought from his cottage. He lights a strip of birch bark that burns bright and smoky. With careful strokes, he severs the hide along the backbone. The skin peels away in one piece. He removes it slowly, ensuring no tear. Soon he drapes the hide over a low branch to cure with the morning breeze. The thick fur will become a warming lining for a cloak or boots. The meat he divides into sections. Some cuts he wraps in leaves and berries beneath the snow in a shallow hole. The frozen earth will hold the meat until he can carry it home. Other cuts he hangs from a branch to dry over gently smoking coals. The smoke preserves the meat for weeks, keeping it safe from wolves and small predators that roam these woods. With the deer prepared, he shifts to fish that lie beneath frozen streams. He carries a wooden chisel and mallet. At a narrow part of the creek where water still flows beneath a thin layer of ice, he strikes the chisel with the mallet until a circular hole appears. He knocks away ice chips, revealing flowing water below. He reaches into a cloth bag for a slender bone rod tipped with sharpened flint. He ties a length of sinew to the end and attaches a small bone hook carved the previous autumn. A smudge of dried fish remains from yesterday's catch coats the bait, giving off a scent that drifts through the hole in the ice. He lowers the hook into water barely deep enough for a small bucket. He rests the rod against the ice edge and covers his hands with woolen mittens. Then he waits. Cold seeps through his mittens until he shifts on his knees to circulate warmth. After some minutes, a tug pulls the rod downward. He grips the rod firmly and pulls it upward. A small trout emerges from the icy water. Its silver scales glint as he holds it by the tail. He removes it gently with the flint hook and drops the fish into a woven basket lined with moss to keep it cool. He returns the rod and hook to the water, seeking more fish beneath the ice. Over the next hour, he catches several trout, enough to fill a small pouch that he will carry home. Each fish weighs nearly half a pound and will feed his family for a day. Next, he turns to setting traps for rabbits and other small game. He carries a bundle of twisted tree roots and slender wooden stakes sharpened at one end. At the edge of a birch grove, he kneels and finds a narrow track where rabbits travel to reach feeding grounds. He digs a small hole in the snow, then positions a bite stick from a young sapling across the hole. The sapling's flexible shoot serves as a trigger. He places the sharpened stake just beyond the bite stick and then covers the stake with a lopsided loop of twisted root. When a rabbit sets its weight on the bite stick, the sapling shoots upright and swings the loop downward onto the rabbit's limb. He covers the setup with a thin layer of snow and drifts stray grasses over it so it lies hidden. He moves to a different clearing where he spots a smaller set of tracks that belong to a pine marten. He finds a hollow log that spans a narrow gully. He approaches and peers inside where a few tufts of fur cling to rough bark. He places a small snare made from woven sinew inside the gully. The loop rests against the far end of the log so that if a marten tries to pass through, it will step into the snare. He uses a few bits of dried meat to lure the animal deeper. He gathers each loose stick around the log to create a narrow corridor, ensuring the marten cannot bypass the snare. He steps back and offers a quiet prayer that each animal that passes through will provide fur and fat for the village. By midday, he returns to his cottage to warm by the hearth and inspect his traps. He stokes a small fire and places a cauldron of broth over the coals. He removes a length of dried fish from the smoking rack in the corner and breaks off a piece. He sips the broth, feeling veins of warmth flow through his chest. He checks the rabbit trap first. He kneels beside the snow and lifts the hinged loop to find a small rabbit held firmly by its hind leg. He thanks the rabbit's spirit and gently slips the creature free from the trap. He returns home to clean the rabbit and prepare its meat. Next, he checks the marten's snare. He sees no movement, though he finds a few tufts of fur entangled in the loop. He resets the snare with fresh bait and moves on. Afternoon light finds him back in the forest, tracking deer once again. The trail today is fainter, but he follows hoof prints that sink slightly into soft spots where the snow has thawed by the deer's body heat. He moves quietly, each step measured to avoid breaking twigs hidden beneath. He lifts a branch and steps gently around brittle grass that sings under his tread. He listens for the distant crunch of a deer walking over crusted snow. He follows until he spots fresh droppings at the base of a large oak. He crouches to inspect the droppings, noting recent leaves still visible in the pellet mix. This sign tells him the deer passed just before sunrise, but it may return to graze when evening falls. He logs the spot in his memory, planning to return when dusk's first shade deepens the woods. Remaining daylight beckons him back to the frozen stream. He clears the ice hole again and rechecks his fishing rod. The hook bears only a few bits of frozen moss from earlier. He draws the hook out and finds no fish yet. He waits until his fingers numb. Just as the sun dips behind the pines, the hook jerks. He pulls sharply and brings up a plump trout. He wins a small smile from the fish that flops once before stilling. He stows it with the others in his moss-lined basket, grateful for its flesh. He knows trout will supplement the deer meat tonight and feed his girls as they prepare for bedtime. As darkness deepens, he approaches a narrow clearing where the final rabbit snares lurk. He hesitates only briefly before stepping across. The moon's light casts long shadows, making every snowdrift appear to ripple. He tests frost on his breath and steadies his spear in one hand, ready for any creature that might slip past a trap. At the first snare, he sees a rabbit caught firmly. He frees it with a swift cut of his knife. He thanks the rabbit's spirit and carries it into his basket. At a second snare, he finds it triggered, but empty. A fox likely claimed the rabbit last night. He resets the snare with fresh bait and moves on. In the last clearing, he finds no sign of small game. He covers the trap and moves toward home, where a warm hearth awaits. At his cottage door, he kneels in the snow to unlace his boots and enters without hesitation. The smell of pine logs burning welcomes him from within. His wife stands over a wooden table, slicing strips of deer meat into small chunks to simmer in broth. A child kneels by the hearth, reaching up to warm a mittened hand. By midday's firelight, he places the basket of fish and rabbits on the table. He holds each prize for his daughters to admire before they help him prepare the feast. He begins by skinning rabbits with a swift flint blade, separating fur from meat in one piece. He hangs the pelts from a hook over the hearth to dry briefly before bundling them for trade at the next market day. The pelts will keep a small family warm when sewn into a cloak or lined in a hat. Next, he prepares the trout, removing bones and slicing the flesh into strips. He lays the strips in a row on a flat stone warmed by the hearth, sprinkling salt and drying them with gentle heat. These dried strips will become jerky that lasts through several weeks without spoilage. As the stew simmers, he sprinkles a handful of dried herbs into the pot, wild thyme, rosemary, and a pinch of dried garlic. He stirs carefully so the flavors infuse the meat. The heat of the hearth carries the aroma to every corner of the cottage. His daughters set plates on the rough wooden table. The older one halves a few loaves of coarse rye bread to serve with the stew. The younger one pours mugs of warmed mead salted with honey to stave off cold. Each family member gathers at the table. They offer a silent prayer of thanks for the deer that walked through the forest, the fish that breathed beneath the ice, and the rabbits that bounded across the snow. They bow to each other's presence, knowing the hardships they faced together. The hunter takes his first spoonful of stew, savoring warm broth and tender morsels. His daughters giggle as the rabbit meat slips off the bone with eager bites. The wife offers sweet bread to her husband, recognizing the hours he spent in cold woodlands to fill their bellies. After the meal, he sweeps stray scraps into a trough for the dog to eat. The dog laps eagerly, its tongue flicking quick, its tail thumping. The dog's fur glistens as he warms by the hearth. Soon the hunter rouses the fire with dry tinder. He places a few small logs onto the bed of glowing embers. The fire leaps upward, roaring in welcome. The children clap and sit close to the hearth's warmth. The hunter and his wife sit side by side on a bench, leaning on each other. They speak of tomorrow's tasks, repairing the traps and seeking out a new deer. As the moon rises high above the snowdrifts, each family member curls up on a pile of furs. The hunter's youngest daughter buries her feet beneath a rabbit pelt. His eldest daughter lies near the hearth, breathing in the smoky air. The father rests on his side, the spear at his reach and quiver of arrows within arm's length. He drifts towards sleep, secure in the knowledge that today's hunt has brought food and warmth. Outside, the wind howls across frozen fields, but each heart within remains steady against winter's chill. In dreams, the hunter follows deer tracks that snake through moonlit woods. When dawn returns, he will rise once more, thrust his spear into his belt, and step into the snow to continue the ancient dance of survival in ice and frost. Before sunrise, a villager awakens to a throbbing pain in his big toe. He pulls off heavy wool socks and sees that the flesh has turned pale and numb. The skin feels waxy. He knows frostbite has set in. Wrapping a strip of woolen cloth around his toes, he cautiously returns to the hearth. The heat of coals glows beneath a pot of water. He tests the water's warmth with a finger, ensuring it is merely tepid before immersing his foot. Too hot, and the damaged tissue will blister. He holds his foot in the water until feeling returns enough to wiggle each toe. He then presses clay warmed by the hearth onto the frostbite, taking care not to press too hard. The clay retains warmth and draws out moisture. He repeats this each hour until his toe tingles with sensation again. Nearby, a woman tends to a scrawny goat that shivers in its pen. The animal's ribs protrude beneath a coarse winter coat. She lifts the goat's chin and examines its eyes. They look dull, and there is a slight feverish glow. She recalls last season's herb gathering. From beneath her cloak, she removes dried nettle leaves and steeps them in hot water. When the infusion cools slightly, she pours it through a simple reed funnel into the goat's mouth. The bitter liquid helps reduce fever and strengthens the animal's blood. She wraps a thick wool blanket around its small frame and instructs her children to gather fresh hay from the barn. They bring armfuls of dried grasses so the goat can warm its belly and gain strength. At midday, the village healer arrives with a bundle of herbs cradled in her arms. She carries yarrow to staunch bleeding and soothe fevers, thyme to clear coughs, and dried honeycomb to sweeten bitter porridges. She visits each cottage in turn, offering advice and remedies. She meets a labourer who struggles to catch breath after a day chopping wood. His chest rattles, and his skin is flushed. She mixes crushed thyme with honey and arranges a spoonful on his tongue. He swallows slowly, grimacing at the sharp taste. She instructs him to rest by the hearth with a linen cloth over his chest. As the herb's steam rises, it loosens phlegm and soothes irritated lungs. Later, the healer examines a child who lies curled beneath a woolen blanket. The child's cheeks burn with fever, and hands feel damp. The healer binds a cold compress of willow bark soaked in cold spring water against the forehead. The bark's properties help cool the child's feverish mind. She checks the child's pulse and murmurs a prayer for healing. Before she leaves, she instructs the parents to make a broth from boiled carrots and rice. The broth will nourish the child without taxing digestion. Back at the healer's hearth, she tends to her own frostbitten fingers. She massages warm butter distilled from last year's harvest into each joint. Butter draws out cold and supplants moisture. She rubs her palms gently until the regaining warmth feels steady. As she works, she recalls how a healer's life demands tending both others' wounds and her own. A young apprentice sits on a stool nearby, offering fresh bandages and charcoal to draw out any lingering infection. She smiles in gratitude at the youth's steady hands. Outside, livestock gather in a sheltered pen. The oldest cow coughs softly, its flanks heaving. A man approaches with a bucket of oats steeped in water and a ladle of honey. He mixes the two into a thick mash and offers a small bowl to the cow. The animal laps the mixture, drawn to sweetness. The honey soothes a sore throat, and the oats provide energy. The man then pours warm water into a trough so the cow can drink without holding its muzzle in icy air. He wraps a spare blanket around the cow's broad shoulders, tucking straps beneath its legs to keep the cloth from slipping. As twilight falls, the villagers assemble at the common hall for a communal meal of broth and bread. A child coughs quietly at the far table, and neighbors lean close to offer warm ginger tea. The steam rises in gentle curls. Each villager sips, feeling heat spread from chest to toes. They exchange news of who remains healthy and who requires extra care. Mothers whisper of midnight visits by healers, and fathers speak of bandaged hands and frostbitten toes that still ache. Before dusk fully settles, a midwife arrives with a basket of warming spices, ginger, clove, and cinnamon. She crushes the spices on a stone slab, releasing their fragrances. She places them in a pot of simmering water and hands a steaming cup to each villager who needs comfort. The spicy fumes draw out chills from bones, and each sip warms their bellies. Even children who resisted earlier tend to drink slowly, lulled by the promise of warmth. At each cottage, families tuck sick members under layers of furs and wool. Fathers stoke hearths until flames leap. Mothers cradle bowls of thick gruel made from barley and herbs, ensuring each spoonful passes smoothly down aching throats. The burning embers cast soft orange light on eager faces as they attempt to banish the cold that creeps within aching joints and rattling breaths. Before night fully falls, the healer returns to check on each patient. She listens to labored breathing, feels foreheads for chill or heat, and adjusts bandages where needed. She applies a final layer of grease, mixed with comfrey, to any frostbitten spots, believing the plant's properties encourage skin to heal. She reminds each family that herbs can only do so much. Rest and steady warmth remain as vital as any remedy. When the healer finally retires, the village grows quiet, save for the slow drip of melting ice and the low crackle of fires. Each cottage stands as a bastion against the cold, yet inside each heart holds concern for the vulnerable. Families pray for dawn's warmth and hope that the remedies of herb and hearth will hold back winter's threat. As the moon rises over snowfields, each culprit of cold and sickness remains at bay for another night, carried on the promise of herbs, hearth, and careful tending. In the heart of the village stands a longhouse built of timber posts and thick thatch roofing. Its walls bear the marks of many winters and the scent of countless fires. At dusk, villagers begin to gather here, each carrying a small piece of firewood or a handful of embers from their own hearth. They come with baskets of dough to bake, jugs of water to heat, and blankets to lend when space around the communal fire runs thin. Inside, a wide stone hearth occupies the center of the floor. Its fire pit holds glowing coals from yesterday's blaze, carefully banked beneath a layer of ash by the last watcher of the night. When the first family arrives, they kneel by the hearth and open a small sack of kindling. Together they coax the embers into flame, feeding thin twigs until a steady blaze grows. As warmth fills the longhouse, more families enter. A father lifts his daughter to her feet so she can feed a fresh log into the fire while her mother offers her a portion of dough for the oven. A man carries a clay pot filled with water and positions it above the hearth's iron grate. Soon steam curls upward, filling the longhouse with the scent of boiling water and reminding everyone that the evening meal draws near. Mothers gather near the front of the longhouse, placing loaves of bread onto a stone slab beside the hearth. The communal oven sits built into the earthen wall at one end of the longhouse. Its wide mouth leads into a chamber where coals will burn hot for hours. A woman stokes the fire in the oven with long tongs and waits until the interior glows with orange light. She brushes away ash, revealing a floor of smooth stone heated through. Then she places the dough inside. The oven door closes with a satisfying click, trapping heat that will bake the bread for the entire village. As bread bakes, villagers pass around a single iron candlestick. Each family takes a turn lighting a candle from the hearth fire. They hold the flame carefully between cupped hands, feeling its heat and marveling at the glow that chases away shadows. Children watch in awe as the candle's flame flickers, their faces lit with gentle light. When one candle burns low, it is extinguished, and another is drawn from the hearth's embers. Through this ritual, each family shares a spark, reminding them that each hearth is part of a larger community flame. While the oven works, elders sit on wooden benches near the fire and share stories of past winters. They speak of how once the longhouse served as refuge when snowdrifts grew too deep for travel. They recall how strangers found shelter beneath the longhouse's roof and how sharing warmth and food saved lives. Younger villagers listen intently, understanding that tonight's gathering continues a tradition of solidarity that binds families through hardship. Outside, the wind rattles the thatch, but inside the longhouse warmth wraps everybody in comfort. Men and women knead dough together, adding water from the clay pot and bits of salt. They shape loaves and slide them into the oven, in synchronized motions passed down through generations. When a fresh batch of loaves emerges, a hush falls. The deep golden crusts crackle as they are lifted from the oven. Villagers break pieces and pass them hand to hand, sharing in the bounty. Meanwhile, children fetch benches to sit closer to the fire. One child holds a plate of thin stew, made from root vegetables and dried grains. She offers each family member a spoonful, moving gracefully even as her woolen cloak sways with each step. Each mouthful brings relief from the day's chill and reminds everyone that warmth alone is never enough. Nourishing food keeps spirits strong through winter's darkest hours. As evening wears on, two neighbors huddle near one side of the hearth and share a single cloak held between them. They take turns resting against its warm wool folds, speaking in quiet tones about family matters. Across the hearth, a father teaches his son how to split a log for the morrow's fire. He holds the log steady and shows the boy where to strike with an axe, guiding each swing until the log yields to a neat gash. By sharing this skill beside the communal fire, the father ensures the boy will one day pass warmth to others. In the corner of the longhouse, a traveler arrives. His cloak is damp and his boots crusted with ice. He pauses at the threshold, shivering, before stepping toward the hearth. A neighbor holds out a mug of warmed ale sweetened with honey. The traveler gives a weary nod, accepts the ale, and brings it to his lips. Warmth spreads through his chest, thawing the frozen grasp on his limbs. He then shares his own ember, pressing a glowing coal into a small iron box wrapped in cloth. He plans to carry that ember to his next stop so another hearth can be kindled. The candle passes from hand to hand through the longhouse, illuminating every face. When it reaches a corner, a mother lifts her child into her arms so the child can see the flame dance. The child's eyes widen at the sight of fire's warmth. She reaches out a tiny hand, almost touching the flicker, until her mother gently grasps her wrist. They smile as the candle's glow draws them together. Before midnight, the longhouse quiets. The fire in the hearth burns low, though small flames still lick the edges of charred logs. The oven's embers glow weakly, but enough to keep walls warm. Families gather their belongings, baskets of baked bread, loaves wrapped in cloth, herbs to steep before bed. They offer parting words of thanks as they step into the cold outside. Each family takes a small piece of glowing ember wrapped in a clay shell to return to their own hearth. The ember will rekindle a flame that disperses darkness and warms their sleeping quarters. One by one, the cottages light up as families return with embers and furs. The traveler wraps himself in a spare cloak left for strangers and enters a small cottage. He places his ember in a hearth prepared with resolute ash. He breathes deeply as a fresh flame flares. He closes the door, offering a small prayer of thanks for the shared heat that guided him. Within the longhouse, two elders remain beside the hearth. They stoke the final coals, ensuring embers hold through until dawn. They speak softly of how sharing ovens and passing a single flame unites a village under winter's trial. As the embers die, they rest in quiet trust that each family's hearth will blaze anew in the morning, warmed by the bonds forged tonight. When the first snows settle thicker on rooftops, the villagers turn their thoughts to Yule, the great midwinter festival that brightens longest nights. Weeks before, families selected a sturdy oak log from the winter stockpile. Fathers and older sons carved simple symbols of sun and stars into its bark, honoring the hope of returning light. On Yule Eve, as dusk gathered, a procession formed in the village square. Villagers carried torches made from pine boughs dipped in resin. Their flickering light led the way to the longhouse where a new hearth fire had been built. At the hearth's center, the chosen Yule log lay across 4 stones. Elders blessed it with a prayer, sprinkling water mixed with juniper and rosemary. They called upon ancient spirits of warmth and renewal. When the blessing ended, a young woman, chosen for her gentle voice, kindled the log with a spark from the embers of the previous year's Yule. As flames caught, a cheer swept through the crowd. Families sang carols that spoke of sunrise and hope. Children watched in awe as sparks rose like tiny fireflies. The log burned slowly throughout the festival, its glow filling every cottage window. Feasting began soon after. Long wooden tables groaned beneath bowls of porridge sweetened with honey, roasted goose stuffed with herbs, and plates piled high with root vegetables. Loaves of black rye bread cooled on cloths beside wheels of aged cheese. Mead flowed from wooden tankards, its sweetness chased by nodding heads and soft laughter. Families shared not only food, but news of the year's harvest, blessings of newborns, and hopes for the coming planting season. Even those who had little to give brought small gifts: a carved bone talisman, a sprig of mistletoe, or a song learned from distant kin. In this sharing, none went home hungry or discouraged. On the night of Candlemas, 40 days after Yule, the village gathered again. At dawn, families carried candles from their cottages to the chapel. Each candle's flame flickered with reverence as villagers processed through snowdrifts toward the hearth of the chapel's entrance. The priest, robed in wool and linen, stood before the heavy wooden door, holding a large candle blessed with consecrated oil. He lit his candle from the hearth fire, then passed its flame to the others. Each family's candle glowed softly, casting long shadows on the packed earth as the priest intoned prayers of light and renewal. Once the candles were lit, the priest raised each high, while chanting words that spoke of purification and protection. Villagers repeated his words in hushed tones. Smoke from candles drifted upward as snowflakes whispered against stained glass windows. After the blessing, families carried their lit candles back to homes, placing them in windows to guard against winter darkness and evil spirits. Many believed that Candlemas lights ensured safe passage for travelers wandering through snowbound roads. Between Yule and Candlemas, smaller winter rituals kept spirits high. On Midwinter's Eve, villagers held a simple feast for humble offerings. A child dressed in goatskins danced between tables, mimicking a spirit of the forest that brought song and laughter. Each drummer beat a simple rhythm on hollowed logs, and villagers joined in step, stamping boots to drive winter's gloom away. They believed that lively music kept shadows from lingering too long near hearths, and that laughter turned cold into warmth. As snow melted slightly under late winter sun, families prepared for the festival of Bridget on the first day of February. Women wove small crosses of straw and placed them above cottage doors to call upon the saints' protection for family and livestock. Each cross, tied with fine linen thread, held a fresh sprig of willow, symbolizing life stirred by thawing waters. They hung crosses beneath rooftops and near stables, so animals would stay healthy through mud season. Children kept a few crosses to hold beneath pillows at night, believing dreams under the crosses would reveal blessings to come. When the first ditching of fields began, families gathered at church on Ash Wednesday for prayers of penance. Just as winter demanded preparation, so did spring. The priest sprinkled ashes on foreheads, reminding villagers of the cycle of life and death. He spoke of renewal that comes after frost as seeds awaken below Earth's crust. After services, villagers returned home to spread ashes in fields. They scraped away surface snow and dusted thin ash lines to mark rows for early planting. They believed this made soil fertile and protected seeds from late frosts. In each ritual, villagers built bonds that reached beyond families. Sharing embers from the Yule log meant every hearth burned with the same flame of renewal. Lighting candles at Candlemas joined hearts in keeping darkness at bay. Dancing at Midwinter's Eve brought laughter, a gift more precious than any loaf of bread. Weaving Bridget's crosses locked hopes of health and growth into each cottage's threshold. And as ashes spread in fields at winter's end, families wove faith into furrows, where tiny seedlings would emerge. As February waned and ice receded from ponds, the final winter ceremony honored those lost through cold or sickness. A simple memorial service gathered hushed voices in the chapel. Names of the departed were spoken and remembered with prayers. Friends and neighbors brought wreaths of fir and holly to lay beneath a stone cross by the well. They believed that honoring the dead purified their own hearts and affirmed life's fragile beauty. By the time candlelight faded on the last of winter's feasts, villagers felt stronger, bound by faith and fellowship. The festivals and rituals forged unity. Families no longer isolated in cottages, but joined under common rituals. The warmth of shared ovens, the glow of candlelight, the laughter at midwinter's dance. Each act conquered winter's gloom. These customs reminded the villagers that while cold months tested bodies and spirits, their bonds held firm, guiding them towards spring's promise and the return of green fields. Snowdrifts cover the fields where grain once grew tall. Now only broken stalks poke through cold white. Villagers wake each morning to emptiness in the barns and gnawing hunger within their bellies. Mothers wrap cloth around their children's stomachs and send them to search for berries or roots beneath the snow. They kneel and brush away layers of frost from the earth, seeking any wild tuber that might survive under ice. Tiny red berries remain on briar bushes, shriveled but edible. Children gather handfuls and carry them home, their hands numb. At dusk, families boil the berries into a thin broth, more liquid than substance, yet they sip eagerly as if it were a festive stew. In this desperation, some turn to crime. A handful of men from a distant hamlet arrive under cover of early dusk. They slip through narrow lanes, their booted feet silent on packed snow. They know where the largest barn stands, its door secured only by a simple wooden latch. With careful hands, they lift the latch and slip inside. Torches held close to leather wraps reveal wide sacks of grain heaped on floorboards. They grab fistfuls of oats and barley, tossing them into cloth sacks. A child stirs inside a corner loft, but drifts back to sleep unaware of the theft. By the time a watchman raises an alarm, the thieves slip into darkness with their ill-gotten spoils. News of the raid spreads quickly. Men gather at the manor hall to discuss how to guard scattered granaries. They form small patrols to stand watch near fields of winter rye that lie dormant beneath snow. Each patrol carries a wood spear tipped with iron. They walk slow circuits, eyes scanning tree lines for movement. At each intersection, they light a torch to keep wolves away. When a farmer passes, they offer a quiet greeting and check his satchel for signs of stolen grain. Trust erodes as neighbors eye one another with suspicion. Some villagers turn to raiding deserted homesteads. A woman ventures out early to gather kindling, but finds a few ears of corn left by a neighbor who fled to a distant city. She pockets the ears and hides them beneath her cloak. When she returns, her husband finds the stash and praises her courage. They roast the kernels over the hearth coals, offering a rare feast for their children. Yet shame gnaws at her as she recalls how she took what once fed others. At night, she wakes to nightmares of angry villagers and empty barns. The lord of the manor grows tired of empty shelves and pleads for relief. He orders that watchtowers be built near main granaries. He sends men on patrol to accompany villagers during grain transports. Each cart travels only at dawn, escorted by armed men who carry bows and short swords. The travelers load sacks into carts wrapped in cloth to protect from frost. They cover carts with heavy tarps so thieves cannot glimpse the contents. If any wagon attempts to pass without the escort, arrows fly and steel clangs to deter the bandits. Despite these measures, some villagers linger on the margins. A young man crouches beneath a fence near the castle granary. He waits until a lone grain merchant returns to the storehouse after unloading. When the merchant's back turns, the young man leaps forward and snatches one final sack of barley. He staggers away across frozen fields before the merchant can call for help. The stolen sack becomes his family's lifeline, but also a silent burden. He fears that one day guards will discover his footprints in the snow and hang him for his robbery. Elsewhere, a group of desperate souls gangs together to raid a noble's winter storage. They carry torches made from pine branches bound in hide. They gather at a crossroads at midnight, knowing torches help them move quietly in the moonless night. When they reach the storage house, they dig beneath the earthen floor where grain rests in hidden pits. The wooden floorboards conceal a secret hatch. With quick blows of a small axe, they break the boards and navigate the darkness using flickering torchlight. They climb into narrow pits and fill burlap sacks with grain. The ground above crumbles as they draw each sack upward. When they climb out, their breaths come fast in cold air. They load the sacks onto a small wagon and disappear into the forest before dawn breaks. In the aftermath of each raid, villagers gather to defend their own. They set up sudden roadblocks of fallen logs across main paths. At each blockade, they station a handful of able men with torches and spears. The watchmen question every traveler. Pilgrims and merchants must present papers verifying their loads. No one enters or leaves unchallenged. When a cart approaches with a heavy load, the watchmen tap the torches along the wooden wheels to hear the dull sound of grain beneath. If the sound rings hollow, they ask more questions. Some travelers choose to turn back rather than face suspicion. Amid this chaos, a handful of villagers form a small militia called the Hearth Guardians. They meet at dawn in a secluded clearing and train with wooden swords and bows. They teach each other basic tactics, flanking maneuvers, silent signals, and setting simple traps. They carry small bells on tripwires and string them along hidden trails. When a bandit triggers a bell, the patrolling guardians respond swiftly, their torches held high to disorient thieves in darkness. They believe that training together and defending one another can restore trust. Villagers also form food-sharing pacts. Households gather around a single fire pit to cook scraps of grain and small bits of salted meat. They sit in close circles so no one steals a hidden morsel. They pass around a large wooden bowl, each spoonful given sparingly. When one family receives a stolen sack of barley, they offer a handful to others in need. They exchange boiled roots for grain flour and promise to guard each other's barns in turn. Despite fears, some still forage the snowfields for last remains of grain heads. They use a small sickle to cut frozen stalks and carry them back to warm hearths. They burn the straw beneath the hearth to generate heat while trapping embers for the next day. Each grain that falls from the stalk becomes a tiny victory against starvation. Children help by crushing grain against flat stones to release the kernels, trapped in frozen husks. Each handful of meal yields a few spoons of porridge that would otherwise be impossible. As winter deepens, lawlessness threatens to overwhelm compassion. Yet some elders remind villagers of their ancient oath to help one another. They hold simple assemblies in the chapel, urging forgiveness for petty theft and beseeching the Lord for mercy. They speak of how winter trials bind hearts not only in fear, but also in shared resolve. Each stolen grain, each borrowed cloak, each guarded barn weaves a tale of survival where crime and charity collide. When the first thaw arrives, the fields reveal more than broken tracks. Villagers find hidden caches of grain, half buried beneath melting snow. They mark each spot carefully and share the recovered bounty equally. Those who once stole now return the grain with shame, and those who lost recover hope. As the sun warms the earth, trust gradually rebuilds. Community leaders dismantle roadblocks and remove watchtowers. Hearth guardians lay down their wooden swords, returning to axes and scythes. They carry memories of hunger and fear, but also of collective resilience that staves off death when winter seems near. In the end, Winter's grip loosens but leaves behind lessons etched in cold and hunger. The borders between crime and survival blur when bellies rumble and frostbite skin. Yet within every act of theft, there remains a plea for life. In every guard's vigilance, there lies a promise to protect kin and stranger alike. As spring's first buds push through thawed soil, villagers step into fields once barred by ice, carrying the memory of hardship yet hungry for renewal. A pale sun glints off the frozen river as villagers gather to set up their winter market. The ice has thickened to nearly a foot where carts can roll without breaking through. Men haul wooden stalls onto the ice, leaving deep tracks that crunch underfoot. Each stall stands on sturdy wooden legs, their legs resting on small boards to prevent sinking into the softer snow on top. Women arrive carrying baskets of goods wrapped in cloth. Their breath forms small clouds as they arrange stacks of salt, dried fish, and loaves of rye bread on tables carved from sturdy planks. At one end of the market, a group of candle makers lay out rows of wax candles in varying sizes. Each candle stands straight and tall, its wax gleaming pale gold in the morning light. Some are slender, meant to burn in simple homes where the hearth remains small. Others are thick and squat, designed to keep a steady flame through long winter nights. A merchant stands beside the display, explaining in a loud but measured voice that these candles will last through months of darkness. He tells of how the wax was rendered from tallow and beeswax last summer, a labor completed before the frost. Villagers gather around, pressing their hands near the stall to warm their fingers before selecting a bundle. Across the ice, a salt trader lays out coarse salt in small cloth sacks. He scoops a bright white pinch and lets villagers taste it with a flick of the tongue. Salt stings on the tongue as it warms, reminding everyone how precious this spice remains. A small bag of salt trades for a piece of cloth or a few barrels of dried beans. Some barter excess cord of wood or a rabbit pelt for the prized seasoning. Children run about underfoot, clutching small coins in their mittened hands as they beg their parents for just 1 coin's worth of salt. The trader offers them a small bag for a quiet word about the price of fish in the summer market. He hopes their small purchase will turn into a larger trade later, once they learn the value of salt in every kitchen pantry. Traders of dried fish set up near the salt stall, knowing the two goods pair well in every meal. The fish are split open and salted heavily before hanging on wooden racks to dry in the cold wind. Now they hang in neat rows on racks in the open market, their silvery skins spotted with ice. Each trader points to the quality of the cut: thick fillets meant for stew, smaller strips for snacking when huddled near a fire. A woman inspects a strip, holding it close to her nose to catch any hint of spoilage. When satisfied, she strikes a bargain with the trader. She trades a small box of candles for 3 fish and a sack of salt, planning to gift the fish to elders who cannot warm their hearths. Boisterous voices rise from a group of woodcutters who have set up a stall for chopped logs and firewood bundles. They split wood just beyond the frozen edge of the river earlier in the day. Each bundle rests on a wooden sled borrowed from the market master for the season. As each log arrives, the woodcutters stack them meticulously, arranging them by size. They trade wood for small sacks of grain and sometimes accept wax candles in exchange. When a debate arises over price, voices grow louder until the market master steps in. He calls for calm and reminds them that fair trade binds the market together. A quiet hush falls until the woodcutters accept his judgment, and both seller and buyer nod in respect. A short distance away, fur traders display pelts of rabbit, fox, and occasional wolf. Each pelt gleams with dense winter fur still intact. One trader lays a thick rabbit pelt on the stall and folds it to show both sides, the dense fur and the clean underside. He explains how the fur was rendered supple by soaking in warm water and rubbing with chalk. When he offers the pelt for sale, he demonstrates by draping it over his own shoulders, showing how it will protect against wind and cold. A farmer from the next village examines the fur, pressing it gently with a gloved hand. He asks for a small discount if he offers a brace of wild partridges in return. The trader pauses, then nods, sealing the trade. In the center of the market, the air rings with lively haggling. A merchant with a stack of coarse wool cloths calls out his prices. Each bolt of cloth bears flecks of natural dye that swirl in subtle patterns. A tailor from a distant hamlet inspects the cloth, measuring lengths with her fingers. She debates over cost until both reach common ground. They trade a rabbit pelt and a small tin of dried herbs in exchange for 3 L lengths of cloth. The tailor cradles the cloth in her arms as if it were a newborn, knowing that soon it will become trousers and cloaks to shield families from winter wind. Nearby, a traveling apothecary sets out jars of dried herbs and vials of scented oils. Each jar holds a remedy for common winter ailments: thyme for coughs, mint for stomach chills, and willow bark for fevers. He lays out small wooden spoons so villagers can spoon a sample of herbs to examine the scent. A mother of 4 gathers handfuls of each, trading a small leather pouch of smoked rabbit meat. The apothecary nods, believing that providing the mother with herbs spares her children from coughs that could kill in winter. He assures her that just a pinch of thyme steeped in hot water can clear any cough if taken each dawn. As the sun tilts toward the horizon, a group of villagers sets up a small area for hot drinks. They place a large pot on a tripod above a blazing fire built from trimmings of willow wood. The pot fills with water, to which they add dried berries and a handful of honey. The liquid simmers and fills the market with the sweet fragrance of stewed berries. A line forms quickly. Each villager holds a simple wooden bowl. They ladle the hot brew into each bowl, offering a sweet tonic against the bitingly cold air. When sipped slowly, the drink warms lungs and bellies alike. Children press their bowls to their cheeks as they sip, their faces lighting up at each warming gulp. Before the market's end, a minstrel appears with a fiddle and wooden drum. He sets up near the center of the ice, his breath visible in the frosty air. He strikes a chord on his fiddle, producing a slow melody that rises above the murmur of haggling voices. When his partner joins on the drum, villagers pause to listen. Some clap their hands in time while others tap their feet, creating a gentle rumble across the ice. The music calls to the weary, reminding them of summer dances under green canopies. Gradually, a few step closer to dance, a man and his wife spin in a gentle circle as snowflakes drift around them. The children gather around, cheering as each couple twirls. For a moment, the market transforms into a festival of warmth and laughter. As twilight deepens, vendors begin to gather their wares. The candlemaker extinguishes his last candle and packs the remaining in a wooden crate. The salt trader gathers his empty sacks and stacks them for transport. Fish traders pull down the last of their racks and wrap each fillet in cloth to protect from frost. Fur traders fold hides carefully into burlap sacks. The woodcutters strap bundles of firewood to their sleds, preparing to haul them home. Each places a final log into his own sled to ensure a warm hearth upon returning. When the ice darkens and torches sputter low, villagers depart in small groups, offering parting words of thanks and promises to return. Each takes home a portion of the market's bounty: salt to season meager broth, candles to light dark nights, cloth to sew warm garments, and small stores of fur to line hats and mittens. They leave behind the hollow echo of wooden stalls and the last notes of music fading into night. Though hunger and cold persist, the camaraderie of the winter market remains as the villagers slip into snowy lanes, carrying with them the warmth of trade, song, and shared resolve. Early morning sun melts frost from fields still dotted with patches of lingering snow. Families gather around tables inside cottages to sort the last reserves of seed saved through winter. Burlap sacks bulge with lentils, peas, and grains, each one marked with chalk noting the harvest's yield. A mother lifts a handful of lentils, examining each small green kernel for signs of spoilage. She sets aside only the plumpest. Others return to the hearth fire to dry further. Outside, a father clears stones from a shallow furrow with his hoe. He swipes loose earth aside to reveal dark soil that once lay frozen. He sprinkles the carefully measured lentils into the furrow, spacing them by eye, and then covering them with a thin layer of soil. A gentle rain arrives as if on cue, soaking the furrow and sending tiny droplets to cradle each seed. Neighbors pause to share tools and encouragement. A child stirs the damp earth with a wooden stick, watching for the first green shoot. Each day they return to count inch by inch as sprouts pierce the surface. These tender tips promise sustenance ahead, lifting hearts battered by winter's hunger. Prayer spills from the chapel at dawn as villagers ask for rainfall and gentle sun. They stand in the thawing fields, clasping hands and silent in hope. Distant hills remain cold, but inside each cottage, spirits warm, as if anticipating the day when green rows rise across the land. The wait tests patience, yet each green leaf that breaks through snow-capped earth brings renewed faith that summer's harvest will follow. Imagine waking before first light to slippers, chilled by frozen stone floors and a single ember in the hearth. You draw on layers of coarse linen, woolen tunics, and animal furs, only to feel each breath like shards of ice. Throughout the festival of Yule and Candlemas, you share scant bread and boiled roots to stave off gnawing hunger. You chop wood until blisters form, hauling each log across drifts deeper than your waist. Each night, you stoke embers painstakingly to keep a hearth alive through long hours of darkness. When frostbite sets in, toes turn pale and numb. You immerse them in tepid water, praying no blisters form. Livestock stand gaunt in pens, and you nurse them with watery broth made from dried herbs and chalky grains. Foraging means sifting wild berries from bushes that shrivel beneath ice. Stealing grain from neighbors tempts you, yet guilt gnaws when you feed bone-thin children a stolen loaf by the hearth. Bandits stalk frozen roads, and you sharpen your spear to guard barns where straw-lined pits preserve root vegetables. At the solstice, you kindle a Yule log for communal warmth, singing brittle carols that do little to melt panic in your bones. When the long wait for spring arrives, you plant a few lentils in half-thawed earth, holding each first sprout against a biting wind. Few would endure the cold without community, without shared ovens and candlelight passed from hand to hand. Winter spares no one's heart. Only unspoken tenacity and shared toil carry you through until thaw finally brings hope.